Alright, you JP players, I did not forget about you guys and your weird interlude campaign that you guys got going on over on the JP version of the game, where for some reason it's Hokusai and Galatea going up on rate up, which I didn't really think was going to be the case. I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting Kama to get another rate up right here, that's why I was really excited when I saw she was getting another interlude. But yeah, Galatea and Hokusai, not the worst options in the world. I mean, you can pick up a really solid single target arts berserker, who's just gonna be generally good in a lot of fights if you have Castoria, or Hokusai, who's a pretty solid AoE arts foreigner, so she's generally applicable in a lot of fights. And because of her foreigner typing, she's actually really good against some of the berserker fights in the game, so if you don't have anybody to really take on berserkers, like maybe your box is just a little bit too squishy, she's really good for that because she's one of the rare characters in the game that can actually resist the damage she takes from berserkers. So we're going to talk about her in today's video, but before we begin, your boy's on that daily FGO content grind, and would really appreciate it if you could give him a like and subscribe on the video. It really does help me out, and your boy is on the road to 100k. So it would be greatly appreciated, but also if you want extra content, like you're just absolutely starving and the one video a day is just not good enough for you, well, I do stream every single day over on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below, or at least every single weekday, because let's be honest, even your boy sometimes needs a little bit of a break. I'm thinking about watching like all of the MasterChef shows, honestly, over there on the Twitch, because Twitch is a little more lenient when it comes to copyright. So I think we're actually just going to start watching shows over there, I'm not going to lie. We'll still stream FGO and all that kind of nonsense, but I kind of want to break it up a little bit to kind of change the stream just a tad. But if you exclusively want more FGO content, you can click that join button to become a channel member, where you can access channel member exclusive content. Namely, right now I got a couple videos up there where it's just me going through some challenge quests with my commentary. Both have been a little bit of a narrow, close call, so if that interests you, click that join button and gain access to those videos. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about Hokusai. Now, starting off with her hits, you should already notice that there's something pretty whack about this character, and that is her NP gain per attack is stupid dummy low at 0.33%. Now you may be saying, but she has 2 arts cards with 6 hits on them, and yes, that is true, those are some really good arts cards, but essentially having an NP gain that low is essentially going to mean that you have to get crits on those arts cards, otherwise you're not doing anything with them. Thankfully, Hokusai did get a buff to her third skill that greatly helps her out in doing that, but just make sure you understand that if you are not critting on those arts cards, you are going to be genning negative NP, my guy. That being said, she surprisingly has a very high star gen stat at 15%. I say very high for a non-assassin servant because usually these servants are packing anywhere from about like 8 to maybe 12%. 15% with a pretty solid quick card at 4 hits isn't actually all that bad, and it kind of makes me wish they made her a hybrid servant of quick and arts instead of the double buster cards. But I guess they wanted you to do the odd buster crit every now and then, don't really know what they were going with that one. And then she has 4 hits on the extra attack, which unfortunately is not that 5 hit extra attack that is the chef's kiss for extra attacks. Now, if you're wondering why I'm even mentioning the extra attack, that's because it's a composite card that gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage and makes your Brave Chains look that much better. However, it's very reliant on your natural NP gain and natural star gen stats because it cannot crit unlike some of your other cards. So while your arts cards for Hokusai can make up for the low NP gain by getting a crit and still gen an acceptable amount of NP, the extra attack does not have that same capability. However, because the star gen is actually pretty decent, you actually can drop a decent bit of stars if you happen to get a Brave Chain that has her quick card in it. So I would keep that in mind at the very least, and you do want to have some stars on the field because the way you want to refund Hokusai's NP is to get crits on those arts cards. That is the main takeaway when you look at her hits. Now, looking at her skills, skill 1 is just a generic, very good skill. It gives her evasion for 1 turn and a 30% NP gauge, all on a 5-turn cooldown. This is actually rather good because usually evasions kind of go on the 6-turn cooldown range. So I think the fact that this skill is only just packing 2 effects is lowering the cooldown for Hokusai, which is actually really good. Because even though she's an AoE servant, she's more targeted to being good in a lot of boss fights in the game. Especially because how her third skill works and how she kind of sets damage onto her opponents and kind of wants to be in the fight for a little bit. It makes her more tailored to being a boss killing servant that can also take care of some of the trash mobs rather than farming because her NP gain stat is so low. While you can still do farming with her, especially because she has her own 30% NP gauge, which is why I like the fact that they did give her a really decent battery, so it opens up that option that if you don't have anybody else, you can still try to make use of Hokusai, which he's clearly tailored to being a boss-killing servant that can take care of all of the goons that might be around the boss. And in that case, the 30% NP gauge is going to be very good to make sure you can consistently fire NPs at the boss to keep a sustainable amount of damage going, and the one turn of evasion is very, very good to keep yourself alive from, say, a boss's NP, or if you just really need to survive that one turn, you don't want to get, like, crit into oblivion or anything. So, skill 1 is very, very solid. You're already off to a good start. Then you have skill 2, which I do like skill 2. I'm just a little weirded out by the fact that the 100% buff removal resistance and the debuff resistance, which is also at 100%, are both only on 1 turn cooldowns. I understand that both of these effects are very good, especially in conjunction with the first skill, because having a 100% buff removal resist means that none of your buffs can even be taken away by the enemy. So let's say you're fighting someone like Shiro Amakusa, who when he fires his NP, he removes your buffs. Well, Hokusai can still dodge that NP, because her buffs cannot be taken away from her on this turn, so if you pop this, with her first skill, you can't get any of your buffs yeeted, and the second skill is something you kind of do want to have up all the time because of that 30% arts buff for 3 turns. You want to have that to not only buff the damage of her arts cards, but also to give her more NP gain, because Lord knows that she needs all the NP gain that she can get. But again, I don't think it would really be all that broken to buff these both up to 3 turns, because then I feel like it would almost give her that Arjuna Archer type effect, where Arjuna Archer has like 5 turns of debuff immunity on a 6-turn cooldown. So basically, you bring him to a fight and he can't be debuffed. He's a very reliable servant, at least in that aspect, and it would kind of give Hokusai that angle. So I think if they want to go ahead and buff the second skill, bump those up to 3 turns each, and then maybe slap on like an additional 20% battery or just like 30% NP gain for 3 turns, and it could really turn around how good Hokusai is looking. But then finally, there's like the titular skill for Hokusai. If you're on the NA version of the game, you can look forward to this skill getting buffed, but this is kind of her main gimmick. So basically, what the main thing that this skill does is it gives her an on-attack buff that when she attacks with her arts cards, she lowers the enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns, and these do stack. And they actually greatly buff up the amount of damage that Hokusai does, because without a lot of these buffs, she's not doing the most damage. Now, there is something that's a little bad about this skill. Actually, there's 2 things that you can be seen as negatives for this skill. For one, it only applies to 1 enemy, which again is kind of why I don't think it's very good for farming and better for boss fights, because for boss fights, you really only care about lowering 1 enemy's defense, and that's going to be the main boss, as all of the trash mobs around the boss are probably going to die in 1 or 2 NPs, but the boss is going to be taking quite a beating, so it's more important to lower his defense. So you really don't care about the trash mobs at all, really. But in farming, you do care about them because you need to wipe out all 3 enemies in 3 turns, and this can be kind of a problem when it comes to farming. So if you care about farming with Hokusai, this can be a detriment. If you don't care about farming with Hokusai, then this doesn't matter literally at all. It's not a detriment only if you want to use her for farming, which I think obviously them giving her a 33% NP charge stat makes it pretty obvious that they don't really want you to use her for farming. You can do it, but again, not the most ideal thing to do. And then the other part that's really bad, so Hokusai wants to do an arts card, then arts NP, and then extra attack. That's like an ideal brave chain for Hokusai, because then you lower 1 enemy's defense by 40% and then you smack them with the NP. But here's the bad thing. That is the wrong way to be using Art Servants. Art Servants want to fire their NP, refund as much as they possibly can get, and then follow up with 2 arts cards to potentially loop the remaining NP back. But Hokusai can't do that, because you want to use your arts cards first to get the bonus damage, otherwise she's going to be kind of hitting like a wet sock. Now they do try to give you some avenue to maybe do like 1 arts card in the front, then the NP, then an arts card in the back, but that is only against specific enemies, as we'll talk about with her NP. But it is something that you do need to keep in mind when using Hokusai, that you will kind of be in this dilemma of deciding what is more important. Do you want to do more damage or do you want to gen more NP? And so while it is a little bit of a detriment, I would say, it does make her a fun servant to use, because you kind of have to actively think about using her skills, and you have to think about what is more important for you to do in the moment. So if you like to have those more methodical turns with your servant, she's going to be a lot of fun to use. But if you want a more straightforward monkey servant, you're not going to get that with Hokusai, because she's really going to require you to think a lot about how much NP gain you need to get back and how much damage you need to do to stay in the fight. Now, thankfully, the buff part for this skill greatly helps Hokusai out a lot, because as I was saying, she's very reliant on getting crits on said arts cards to refund her NP, because if you're not getting crits, those 6 hits really don't matter when you have 0.33% NP gain. But if you're getting crits, all of a sudden, you're refunding a lot of your NP back, because that massively gasses up your NP gain rate. And so what this skill does is it increases the star weight specifically to her arts cards for 3 turns, and it drops 15 stars for her to immediately be able to play around with. So you can kind of start setting up a really good turn for Hokusai by popping this, which you kind of want to pop anyway because you want to start lowering the enemy's defense as soon as possible. And so it's a really good, just general skill for you to pop first as soon as you get Hokusai on the field. Now let's go ahead and talk about that NP like I was mentioning. Now this NP is a little bit basic. It literally just smacks all enemies. It's an AoE 5-hit arts NP, but then it has a special damage mod against man attribute enemies, which actually is a really large part of the game. This includes a wide variety of servants and a wide variety of normal enemies. I mean, just think about like your skeletons, your Roman soldiers, druids, Amazones, the different knights and everything. Like, it's just a lot of general enemies that you'll fight a lot of the time. And the good thing is that since she's an extra class servant, you can really bring her to any of these servant battles that you could possibly want. And there's some pretty common servants in here. People like Nero, Emiya, Robin Hood, William Tell is a boss fight in Lost Belt 4, just general good servants that either have boss fights or pretty common in events as like third wave servant. So if you need to bring her in for something like that, it does make her look pretty good. And then the other thing that I was kind of mentioning earlier, that you can maybe sacrifice having to use an arts card before the NP if you're fighting somebody with the man attribute, and then you don't have to sacrifice your NP gain with the subsequent arts cards, and then it kind of balances out if you're fighting somebody with the man attribute. So that's kind of how it rebounds around. And if you look at her damage, it's greatly helped out by the fact that she has this special damage mod, because it takes her from like the bottom of the list to then competing with Summer Kama, who is a pretty high damaging AoE art servant. So being in that category when she has her special damage mod up is really, really good. Now, is Hokusai worth summoning for? Unfortunately, I would say unless you're a huge Hokusai fan, I would kind of avoid this banner. Because if you're looking for an AoE art servant, you're better off waiting for Summer Kama to come back around, Space Ishtar, or even someone like Shiro Muramasa for him to come back around. But if you're really looking for like an AoE art servant that can do really good in challenge quests, then Hokusai is definitely going to be your girl, because she performs really, really well in those harder content as opposed to being used as a farmer. But I already know there's going to be comments on this video with people saying like, oh, I use Hokusai to farm all the time. And again, yes, while you can brute force your way into having her farm, it's not really a big brain take to say she's not one of the best farmers in the game, because, I mean, 0.33% NP refund isn't very good. So use her for more difficult content, only use her for farming if you absolutely have to. If you're on the JP version of the game and you're looking at this rate up, I would kind of dodge Hokusai, especially because we have a great Koyenskaya event coming around the corner, or at least I'm assuming it's going to be great. Crossing my fingers for that Koyenskaya rerun, since Morgan was able to come back after only a month, so I'm kind of hoping they do that again for Koyenskaya over here. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.